consultant in the Netherlands, and I'm glad to speak about getting the most out of Revit and IFC for buildingSMART International, this user conference 28th of April. The content of this presentation, it will take about 20 until 25 minutes, then we have a few minutes over to answer the questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. The content of this presentation, it's about BIM and openBIM. I will tell something about a sample project where we used successful Revit and IFC in the workflow, the benefits of openBIM, how IFC can easily flow between different partners, present some topics, how to generate IFC from Revit, and then referring to the brand new buildingSMART International User Program, a website where the articles are stored as a guideline. BIM and openBIM, normally I explain it like BIM has three different explanations about it. The first meaning is building information model. It's a digital representation. The second is building information modeling. It's more about the process. And the last, building information management, it's about the information itself, and it's more to a data-driven organization. Sometimes by my clients I see that they first focus on getting and creating these 3D models, building information model, and later on that they move to building information management. Then about the sample project, where we successfully used Revit and IFC in a workflow. It's called Gelders Huis. It's a BIM project from the government building. On the left of the square is an existing building, and on the right a new building built with an integrated contract form. So they had to design, had to realize, and also 20 years management, maintenance. And BIM was very important in this project because the information provision for the users should be optimal, and also that they helped the organization to data-oriented organization. Now, Revit and IFC is used in this workflow. Several aspect models, several discipline models I will show you in a few minutes live, and they are all modeled in the design phase with Autodesk Revit and exported to IFC. IFC is for industry relation classes. For the communication is BCF used, BIM Colaboration Format, and very helpful and also very strong is in IFC the objects with relations, with the properties and hierarchy. So it's much more than just a file format to exchange. When we focus on the objects with relations, with the properties and hierarchy, we see a lot of information, and that information is also used in this project, in this sample project. Also the inventory, but also the MEP, the sprinkler, all kinds of aspect models are modeled. Now what is important, we wrote before the project started the BIM requirements, and for example each object should be placed on the specific floor, so it should be modeled by building story. Also objects should have a classification, and it should according to the Dutch FVB BIM norm, it's a standard about government organizations how to build up the BIM model. But also the BIM basic ILS, in a few minutes more about that. They had to deliver the native and IFC aspect models, and the communication was done by BCF. Here the workflow that we used, so we have different stages from initiative, design, engineering, realization and use. And there's a big challenge already in the design phase to exchange all the information between an architect and a static engineer and an MEP, etc. And we see also a big challenge during the workflow because the building information model data is exchanged and shared among several software applications used by various participants. So a steel factory is using the specific software for the production. Limestone vendor has his own software, and therefore we need also the IFC models. Now, as lessons learned for this BIM project, this collaborate and coordinate is very useful to have IFC and BCF. And now the models are used as a kind of as-built situation, and they would love to move towards a digital twin organization. So even more using sensors, the data of the sensors linked to the BIM model for daily maintenance, operation information. This is the requirements that was used. In Dutch it's called ILS, Informatieleveringsspecificatie. In English, Information Delivery Manual. They are also available under user guides by buildingSMART, www.buildingsmart.org, users, user guides. Also for communication BCF, buildingSMART had also there a BCF knowledge card, communication card under user guides.
This is an impression of the sample project. In the design phase, Autodesk Revit was used. These aspect models were exported to IFC. What we see here, the new building, IFC aspect models. Let's focus, for example, on the structural part of the building. Then we can see here all the structural elements. Also very useful is the IFC hierarchy. For example, all the objects from the first floor you can select there. Very useful also for IFC is the IFC property sets. For example, P-set wall common. You can see here the fire rating is external, load bearing, and we can check on these properties, but also we can use them for information takeoffs, filtering, grouping, and viewing purposes. Best practice where, for example, since there are several buildings on the same location, that we need to have an agreement about the origin, what's the exact location, so we can merge them on the same place. But also IFC grid is used. We can switch on and off to this building. IFC spaces are used in combination with IFC zone. These are also written on the buildingSMART articles. Also the right IFC classes, for example the columns from the first floor. When I want to show them, can easily select in the hierarchy. Also remarkable or useful in Solibri is to group them by each category. Also the layers in Autodesk Revit can be also used for several purposes. And the classification is used in this project. Classification, in the Netherlands we have an NLSAB classification with code 28 is structural elements, and this classification code is attached to all the objects. The definition of BIM I recognize in this sample project, building information modeling, a process, and as also the ISO standard 19650 defines shared digital representation of a built asset. We recognize that also in the sample project. The definition of openBIM, some of the principles openBIM that I recognize also in the sample project. The interoperability, it's open, reliable, it's collaboration, flexibility, and sustainability. Since IFC files can be opened many years after they are created with several software applications. ISO 16739 is the standard for IFC, and the link for buildingSMART website for more information. It's the technical.buildingsmart.org website about the standard. The benefits using openBIM, we recognize them also in the sample project, and we see benefits for several stakeholders, not only the owners but also the architect, facility managers, for the software vendors itself, for the whole society. Very short explanation about use of open standards as we see that in daily practice. The models are created in native software, in this case Autodesk Revit, exported to IFC. They are aggregated in the model and issues are documented in BCF file format and sent back to the modelers. Then to the workflow Autodesk Revit, how to come to IFC files. I used version Revit 2020 as native files and created IFC. These are the topics. These topics are based on frequently asked questions. I show in a few minutes how to create IFC grid lines, how IFC zones, IFC spaces, IFC classifications, and of course a glimpse of the IFC settings in general. In this part of the session I will explain how to export from Revit version 2020 to IFC. There are only some examples on the buildingSMART website. There are more articles documented how to export. First, about levels. Many times I get the question, why do I see a lot of IFC building stories? Well, in Revit it's like this. If there is a level you can select, you can see by properties building story. If this is on, it will be an IFC building story, but you can also unselect it. For example, this is a dummy level, so I can unselect this as a building story. Second thing is about how to classify objects. There are several ways to make in Revit an IFC classification reference. Let's assume I want it as assembly code. I select the wall. In this case, there is already a code, but you can manually create one. You can go to Manage, Additional Settings, and you can choose which assembly code file will be used, since there are several classification systems. In the Netherlands, we use normally NLSFB classification reference, but it can be also OmniClass. So let's assume this model should be classified like OmniClass. You can choose this as a settings file. Edit type, assembly code. Here you can select it. A pop-up will be there, and you can say, for example, this is a wood frame structural walls. As soon as you select this, automatically an assembly code will be filled in also. I click Apply, and now these walls from these types are automatically classified with this OmniClass code. Then something else I want to explain. It's about grouping. In IFC you have also IFC assembly. This is already assembled, but in Revit you can pick one, choose here create a group or create an assembly. You can fill a name and then use edit assembly to add more objects. I create now 3 objects in this assembly. I will finish this, and just in a few minutes you will see in the IFC export that this will be an assembly. Also as example, space, I go to level 1, floor plan. I created already a room, and this room you can give some properties. The name I filled in as office room. You can put in some comments, which department, and the number, and these are important ones for IFC also. Also, I created here zone on the buildingSMART website. In the article IFC zone, it's documented how to create these zones, but you can see here some example values that will also show up in the IFC file. Then about the grid lines. Let's assume we have several grid lines. Normally they are not displayed when I make an export to IFC. As explanation, go to Export, go all the way to Options, IFC Options, and there is a Revit category mapped to an IFC class name. You can browse the group grids. And you have to fill in IFC grid. Normally it's filled with not exported, but if you put in there IFC grid, the grids are also included in the IFC grid lines. Let's switch back to 3D, since there are multiple options also exporting to IFC. Normally exporting to IFC, File, Export, you go to IFC, and you can create a name here, and also there are several setup files possible. Let's modify setup. Normally, if you want to adjust, you can create a copy. So I make a copy now, and this makes it possible now to adjust where needed. First, we go to property sets. I want to export Revit property sets. These are the common property sets and also possible base quantities. Here is also a possibility to give in the right classification settings, and it's filled here now with Omni class number. But if I fill here assembly code, then this parameter of Revit is used for IFC classification reference. By general, you can choose which version. Now it's selected IFC reference view, exchange requirement, which file type, which phase to export, space boundaries, and coordinate system. Also new from version 2019 and higher, you can fill in a project coordinate system. This is also explained on the buildingSMART website. Additional content. Since a 3D view is now selected, you can say I want to export rooms, areas, and space also in 3D view. Otherwise they will be not exported to IFC. Let's export it. You could see here in the left corner that Autodesk Revit was exported into IFC, and the IFC file is first. Let's use BIM Vision. As you can see, it's the same project. You can select, for example, a wall. It's this basic wall, generic, and you can see here by classification the Omni class is attached to that. You can see all kinds of properties also. Since they are Revit parameters, also the assembly code, the assembly description, but also the buildingSMART official P sets. For example, this wall common. And since I ticked on also the quantity takeoff, the wall-based quantities are also attached to this wall. You can see here the grid lines. So this is one of the viewers. Another viewer already mentioned is Solibri Office as model check. You can think on and off here also the grid lines and select to which extents, which level you want to see also. Let's look into the classification here also. You can see the Omni class. It's now included for the walls and the door. They have a Omni class classification code attached to that. Since we exported also the space, you can see here IFC type, type name, all kinds of information, also the P set, space common, etc. What we could also see here from this project, there's an IFC site, the building, and here are the building levels as shown: level in, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is also including the assembly. Is this IFC assembly is created from one beam and two columns there underneath it as IFC assembly. Also a different viewer that I use normally to navigate through the IFC is this DDS IFC Navigator. You can load an IFC file, but you can also use the whole schema to find specific objects, for example, wall. You can find information about wall, standard case, where it is in the schema. But let's look into the file already loaded as a showcase project. And you can see, for example, here is the IFC grid. If you double click that, you could see more information on the buildingSMART website. You can see here the classification also. So if I to the classification, you can see here as well structural walls, as well also the doors. Then this last part of the session about the buildingSMART International User Program, the brand new website where the articles start how to export to IFC. And in my daily work I noticed that there is a lot of added value if everyone in the chain can work with their own software and that the exchange of BIM models with IFC can take place. There are a lot of settings, known issues that can help the community to export and import IFC in a correct way. It's documented like, for example, how to export from Revit to IFC, in this case IFC project. What are the settings? What is the link to the buildingSMART website? Here you can see the web address. For creating the IFC, we used the principle that in many requirements the result is documented in IFC. And here you can see how to deal with that using Revit. In this articles, Revit version 2020 is used, and it's a completely new user program. We will also create more instructions in the near future. So please feel free to give feedback or let us know which topics we should post more.